I know it can be different things depending on the week, but what just generally, is there a common theme on the first possession and kind of just the big guys have struggled to get off, get rolling?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a common theme, but it comes down to just putting our guys in the best position and then them executing. And sometimes, the defense is in a good call and puts us behind the sticks, or sometimes there's an execution issue. But we've had enough success this year that at different times, not as consistent as we want to, that we'll work through it.
Joe, have you seen Sean today? Seeing at times safeties leaning a little bit more towards Portland this year, a little bit more defensive attention. Have you guys seen that so far this year?
Yeah. I don't know if there's more. I mean, he's always somebody I think defenses have paid attention to, certainly the last 2 years. And so, when they do that, there's other places you can take advantage of the defense. I think feel good about all our receivers and all their ability to win. And so if they're taking away a guy, we got to find someone else, but we'll and then find routes that beat what they're trying to do to stop Cortland. And so there's a lot that goes into it, but people pay attention to him a lot, and it's something that we anticipate and plan for. But that's what happens when you're a good receiver.
Joe, what do you like about R.J. Harvey, who could see an increased workload?
Yeah, he's just a guy that's growing right before our eyes, and smart player. We've talked about it before, talented, and we'll see what happens. But if he does get more reps, I think it'll be good for him. It's a position that's hard when you've got a lot of guys that are good. Getting them all their fair share of touches, and I think if his workload increases, we're going to see his production increase and be real excited about it.
Joe, the quarterbacks have been around. Are they similar in what sort of gets them in a rhythm early in the game, or are guys sort of unique?
I think everyone's. Completions help get you in a rhythm, and so finding completions early. Then everyone reacts to it different. And, I think we've seen from Bo, there have been, games where we've struggled offensively early, and then, all of a sudden he finds a way to turn it on and, do what we have to do in the fourth quarter or the second half or whenever we need it. Whatever we need to win a game, he finds a way. So he's resilient that way. And, I think there's a lot of belief that we'll find a way regardless of how it starts. And it doesn't mean we want to start slow, but it's funny listening to, we got LJ back, and he said when he was on the sideline when we were down against New York and they were acting very confident. He was like, guys, you don't know what's going on over there. Those guys don't care. They're going to keep playing hard and do not let up. Do not expect this thing to be easy the whole way. So, LJ had that feeling just being here last year, and so, I think it's something that's real.
Coach, what does Lil'Jordan bring to the offense, especially this coming week?
Yeah, I think he's really smart. He's a good blocker. I think he's more productive than people give him credit for. I think if you really understand what he does or what he's done for us in the past, you appreciate, what a big role player he's been for us. I know he's not the flashiest player, but he's a good, solid player. You know exactly what you're getting from him. You know that if you give him a job, he's going to get it done, and that's important.
Guys like Kurt Warner and Chase Daniel have talked about Bo Nix's footwork.
Yeah.
A quarterback of any experience level. Are mechanics just something you constantly work on or have reminders about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always a tricky thing. I think the guy that we're playing this week, Mahomes, he's changed maybe the perception of the position where it's, he throws so much off platform and has so much success. And so there's a fine line. You have to walk there. There are times where you're like, man, I wish, the quarterback would have kept his base and been in a better position to throw. And then the next snap, he's off running for a 20-yard gain. And so it's definitely something that you have to work on, and just having that experience of like, man, I can anticipate this route's about to come open, so I'm going to stay in my base and climb, versus, man, I don't know where I'm going with this ball. I got to start moving in a way that gives me a chance to scramble. and then having the physical ability that, something popped I didn't anticipate, and being able to throw off platform. So there's a lot that goes into it. Being around Drew for as long as I was, I appreciate what those guys are saying. But I also understand that each player is unique, and, it's dialing it in where, you have the right footwork for the right situation is something that comes with experience.
Joe, Troy has led you guys pretty comfortably in targets the last few weeks. Is that something that, does that surprise you guys as a staff? Is that just his development? Is it a function of what defenses are doing?
I think a little bit of everything. He's a player that we keep gaining confidence in. He keeps producing for us, and so every play there's a progression to it. And when you design a play, there's a primary and then there's a secondary, and it doesn't always go the way you design it because of what the defense is doing. And so the question earlier, they're leaning a safety towards Cortland, and the corners leverage changes on them. And so, we anticipated maybe in man-to-man the ball's going to Cortland, but they took it away because of the way they're playing, and so now I have to progress. So, he's certainly primary in a number of routes, and then sometimes progression brings you to him, and, and so it's a combination of all that.
How difficult is Pat Mahomes, not only because of his rushing ability to throw off platform, but the fact that the guy seems like one of the smartest quarterbacks to ever play?
Yeah, he's been the best for a long time. He's a winner. The plays he can make off schedule, that makes it tough. Obviously, they're in a huddle and they have a play called, and you can defend that play perfectly, and he can obviously buy time in the second act. That's where he makes his explosive plays. So going against Patrick, obviously, how you rush him is important. How you cover is important. But the second part is, just keep chasing him and keep plastering on the back end, because those plays they've made over the years, him and Kelsey especially, has been hard on defenses. So it's a true challenge. And they've got, these new receivers they've got. It's a track team. You got 4.26, 4.30, so that makes it challenging.
Since you got here in 2023 as a DC, Mahomes has only averaged under 15 points per game against you in those 3 games. Has there been a constant in all those games that you bring, or do you have to switch things up every single game?
I'm not sure it's a constant. I don't look at games like that. I take every game differently, organically. I go back usually at the end of the week. Teams change, by the months, so I don't rely on what we did last year. Will it work this year? I'm not sure. I go back to that Friday, Saturday night and kind of just check my notes, but, I'm working off this year, and this year he's playing well. We have to obviously defend both the running game and the pass game, and he's making plays at a high level. They're great in the red zone. If they get down there, they're scoring. They're barely playing third downs. That means they're winning on first and second down. So, that's different than last year. So I can't go off last year's film and numbers. I'm going off the last month and a half.
They've had trouble protecting Patrick the last couple of years. How do they? I know they tried to fortify that in the offseason. How do they look now, the offense?
It's working for them, Mike. I think every offensive football team, if they're in known passing situations, they have a hard time blocking these guys. That's every team in the league. It's not one team that we played. If it's a known pass down and you're asking all 5 linemen to win their one-on-ones, that's tough to do. So it's no different than the Chiefs, but they are keeping their third downs manageable. They're winning first down, so the ball's out of his hands fairly quickly. So, I don't really worry about, how they're going to block us. It's more about getting them covered and making him hold the ball long enough till we can get there. He has a, great feel for rush. And the great quarterbacks, they make the offensive line better. So he won't hold the ball if they're open. So my first concern is getting them covered so he can hold the ball and then move on from there.
Vance, what are your thoughts on Alex's diagnosis, playing fit, and then with him missing how much time with or not doing it?
When he told me last week, my first thoughts was him and his family. It wasn't football at all. And I made him understand that it wasn't about football. Like, take care of your family and make sure you're okay. And that was my first concern. Obviously surprised, but he is so resilient, man. He was smiling the whole time. I was super upset, but he was smiling, and I'm going to be all right, and we caught it early. So he's always been positive, but our first thought was him and his family first, and football was secondary. So and hopefully it all works out for him.
How important just is he to this defense in terms of the guy who wears the green dot, the captain? Like, what does he do behind the scenes or on the field that maybe we don't always appreciate or the fans don't always appreciate?
I think for him, even last year when he went down after Tampa, we played, Cody and Justin were young guys, and Cody was new to their system. He was in every meeting with those guys. He traveled to every game, so he was basically helping coach the linebackers. Even this week with Justin and those guys playing for him, he's been in every meeting coaching the linebackers. So he's so important, to our team because of that leadership, but also his career has been a guy who's kind of earned his way, and we have a defensive team full of guys like that. So it's relatable for our guys that he was cut 10 times. He went to Canada, came back, and became a great player in this league. So it's a great example for our young guys to keep pushing and keep grinding. But, and he shares those stories constantly to our guys. But his football IQ allows me to call games a certain way. I can make a call. I called one last week, and it was a little bit off the coverage. He fixed it. So that's the beauty of having an experienced play caller for you.
Time for a few more for Vance. When you face a guy a couple times a year, division opponents, especially like Andy Reid, how much do you have to be cognizant of your own tendencies, or how much do you think, maybe not about a game 2 years ago, but about the way that you call a game?
Yeah. Well, I think that's my point with the earlier question, right? I take each game, by the month at a time, so I'm looking at what I've done the last month also, and he has to do that also. Teams do change. Pat hadn't played in 2 weeks. So what are we doing without Pat? So that's Andy's concern also. So it goes both ways. That's why I don't go back too much on certain opponents, obviously, because it matters what happened in the last month. So I'm checking my numbers all the time as far as what I'm doing on certain down and distances, versus what formation and personnels, so I'm keeping Andy kind of guessing a little bit also.
Hey, Vance.
Last one, Jared.
Vance, when you think about this particular unit versus all these other ones you've had and been around, what's unique about the personality? How would you describe just what they bring forth?
That's a great question. That makes me smile because it's a unit of unselfish people, and to watch these guys on game day, especially when a buddy makes a play and see his teammates' joy, it's really special, and that makes the unit go. It's a bunch of guys in that room that's kind of self-made, outside of Patrick, he's a top 10 pick and he's special. But, it's a bunch of guys who are self-made guys, who've grinded, who've gotten better each year, who kind of, play to the team concept, With our sack numbers, a bunch of guys get sacks and a bunch of guys kind of force sacks. But you watch when a guy gets the sack, man, they are celebrating like it was their sack. And that's the best trait of this unit. It's so unselfish and such team-first guys. And they want success for their teammates. So that makes me smile.
It's obviously been talked about a little bit. I think Sean talked about Crawshaw's, maybe some of those early punts. What do you think was going on Thursday that he wasn't as consistent as he
Yeah, listen, from watching the game, both sides were having issues with the operation, right? It was kind of an odd day. It was probably one of the most unique win days that I've been a part of. It wasn't that big of a deal in pregame, so you really didn't have that much to work with. The pregame actually went really well, and then as the game went on, the fans may not know there's really a big difference between a ground wind and the wind up in the air, and people wouldn't think that. But the ball wasn't really getting affected too much when it got up in the air. But man, the operation was a struggle for both sides. Their punter obviously dropped one on the ground. Unfortunately, we weren't rushing on that one. And they had some other issues. And then Jeremy was really, his whole deal was with his drops, and the ball was moving on him in the air when he was dropping the ball, and that's really came down to it. So the first couple. Really, the first one had nothing to do with that. That was just a miss hit. The next couple had something to do with the ball moving, on the drop. So being able to control your drops when, holding a little longer, there's techniques that we use. He fixed it as the game went on. But like I said, you really saw both sides, struggling with that a little bit, and we got to be better there. He had a great day of practice yesterday. We had a little bit of wind, which is good. So you can only practice it when it's. But like I said, earlier, it was very unique in the fact that a lot of times when I've been involved in those games, being in Miami for 10 years, we went up to Buffalo 10 years straight, up to New England, up to the Jets. So I've been in my fair share of inclement weather games. but usually you have a chance to get a kind of barometer in the pregame. And this wind kind of just kept going and going and going and picking up, so we didn't get a really good chance to practice it during the pregame. So, it's something that's, we learn from it like everything else. We move on, but like I said, it's something we got to handle moving forward because we're going to obviously play in some of those games again.
Having Marvin back at the returner spot, does that change the way you're able to call games and approach games, or is it just everything he does on the field?
Yeah, listen, Marvin's very unique, right? He's one of the better returners in the league, so having him back there certainly is a bonus for us. I'll start by saying that. With the game plan, it's a very good question. We're going to run different returns based on the returner. We have multiple returns we can run, whether it's downhill, sideways, sideline. We have a kind of a list of returns, a menu, if you will. And so, yeah, with different style guys, you're going to, there's really not much that Marvin can't do. But sometimes that list can maybe get a little limited with another guy. And so, yeah, it definitely changes. Now, whether you're going to return it, whether you're going to rush, I think that's all predicated upon maybe the field position, down and distance, game situation. But in regular situations, I would agree. Definitely Marvin gives you more options for sure.
When the weather is exactly the way it was and Will misses a kick, do you even have to talk about it? Or is it like, hey, man, it's just one of those nights? Like, is there a conversation about that?
Yeah, looking back on that kick, the operation wasn't great. On that operation, just as a whole, going that way. Talk about the pregame. Will had a couple of really good kicks in pregame going that way, 62, 64. He had a 62-yarder into the net, so we felt kind of comfortable with, but he didn't have a clean hit on it. The ball, again, the operation wasn't great, and I think that also comes back to the weather issue, like you said. So, no, not much to clean up there. He came back, had a great day yesterday, so I expect him to just keep moving forward. And again, like I said before, not to beat a dead horse there, but Jeremy's pregame and Will's pregame was I was really excited going into the game with the way they were hitting the ball in pregame.
Talk about it being windy out here with, I guess, just practice techniques evolving. Is there anything to simulate wind, or can y'all come up with a way to?
That's the hard. Yeah, that's the hard one. Now we've had our fair share of windy days, which is good. We come out, we hit on Friday again, and we try to take advantage of the bad weather, if you will. You can do wet ball drills, you can simulate rain, you can simulate all that stuff. It's hard to simulate the wind. So when we do have windy days, one interesting thing you wouldn't think, when we switch the fields here, we get different winds. We switch the fields, we get a crosswind. When we switch the fields this way, we get more of a backwind or into it. So we try to practice as much as we can, all through the training camp, preseason, regular season, anytime we have those days like that. Try to hit it, but it's a very good point because it's not something you're not going to bring a big fan out. No, you can, and listen, I've seen teams do that. We even a day like today, it got windy here at the end, and then Mitch and Jeremy are over there doing their operation. They're not actually hitting the ball today, but we'll get any day it's wind out, we'll get our work.
How excited was Sean to get Lil'Jordan Humphrey back, and I assume he'll work on some teams too? Yeah,
I was part of having LJ at the Saints. It was great to see him. I've always been a big fan of LJ. He's a multi-dimensional player. Wherever he's been, whether it was New England or New York, here, the Saints, he's always been a guy that's kind of been multifaceted. So it's good to see his face. Good to see a friendly face.